The dry dock at Naval Base San Diego shimmered in the heat of a late September afternoon. The air, thick with the smell of salt, diesel, and marine paint, carried the clang of metal on metal from a nearby repair bay. Commander Marcus Thorne stood with his hands on his hips, squinting against the sun's glare as he surveyed the damage to the bow of the USS Michael Murphy. A greenhorn helmsman had misjudged a turn during a live fire exercise, scraping the hull against a pylon. And the noise of the impact had been sickening, a deep, grinding groan that had silenced the entire bridge. Now the ship was in for a week of repairs, and Marcus was left with a mountain of paperwork and a restless crew. He was a big man, carved from the kind of granite that only 2 decades of naval service could produce. His close-cropped hair was more salt than pepper now, and his blue eyes held the distant, watchful look of a man who had seen too much. As the commanding officer of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, his word was law. He was respected, even feared, but beneath the gruff exterior was a tactical mind that had earned him a Silver Star and a chest full of ribbons during his years with DevGru, the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He had left the teams for command track, trading the desert night for the bridge of a warship, but the instincts never left him. With the repair crews swarming the exterior, the ship's interior was a hive of activity. The usual rhythm of drills and maintenance was disrupted. Sailors were detailed to tasks they hadn't touched in months. Marcus decided to do a walkthrough, a habit born of a desire to keep his finger on the pulse of his command. He moved through the passageways, his boots making a solid, rhythmic sound on the non-skid deck plates. The ship was a living thing, and even in its static state, he could feel its heartbeat. He descended ladders into the bowels of the ship, past the cramped berthing compartments and the galley where the smell of stale coffee and scrambled eggs lingered. His destination was the armory, a space he always liked to check personally. It was the ship's beating heart in a different way, the place where its offensive and defensive power was stored. As he approached, he heard a sound that was out of place. It wasn't the clatter of cleaning rods or the chatter of the gunner's mates. It was a soft, humming melody, a folk tune he vaguely recognized, mixed with the delicate, precise sounds of metal on metal. He paused at the hatchway. Inside, the space was immaculate. Racks of M4s and shotguns stood in perfect alignment. Rows of 9mm pistols gleamed under the fluorescent lights. And in the center of the room, laid out on a thick canvas mat, was the undisputed queen of the armory, an M82A1 Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle. The weapon was a beast, over 4 feet long and weighing nearly 30 pounds. Its mere presence was a statement of devastating force. Kneeling before it was a figure he didn't immediately recognize. It was a woman, her sandy blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that peeked out from under her ball cap. She was a petite woman, her frame seeming almost delicate compared to the massive rifle she was meticulously disassembling. She moved with a fluid, unhurried grace, her hands steady and sure. She held a small brush in one hand, gently whisking away an invisible speck of carbon from the massive bolt assembly. Her focus was absolute, a point of stillness in the mechanical heart of the ship. She was a ghost, utterly absorbed in her task. Marcus leaned against the hatch frame, quietly observing. He had seen plenty of sailors clean weapons. It was a chore, a box to be checked. But this was different. This was a ritual. Her eyes, a calm, intelligent green. I roamed over every surface of the disassembled parts, cataloging, assessing, approving. She didn't just see metal. She saw the history of every round that had passed through it. He cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, and for a split second, her gaze was sharp, assessing, cataloging him as a potential threat or a simple variable. Then just as quickly it softened, and she straightened up, coming to a form of attention. "Commander," she said. Her voice was quiet, and a low alto that held a surprising amount of depth. "As you were," Marcus said, Stepping into the room, he gestured towards the rifle. That's not standard issue for a cleaning rotation. That's the captain's pet project. I wasn't aware anyone was assigned to it. Petty Officer First Class Riley Burns, sir, she introduced herself, wiping her hands on a rag. I'm a DC, damage controlman by trade, but Gunner's mate Dixon knows I have a background with the platform. He lets me come down and work on it in my off-watch hours, keeps it in tune for the VBSS teams. Marcus nodded, his eyes drawn back to the rifle. The M82 was a finicky weapon, a gas-operated, semi-automatic behemoth designed to punch through concrete walls and disable light vehicles at over a mile. It was a far cry from the bolt-action precision rifles he was used to. He had carried an M40 in the field, a weapon that required a calm breath and a still hand. The Barrett was brute force, a la sledgehammer. Background? He asked, his curiosity piqued. Combat armsman? Were you a range coach? Riley looked down at the receiver in her hands, her expression unreadable. Something like that, sir. I just understand it. It's a weapon that demands respect. A lot of people think it's just point and shoot. They don't realize the math, the wind calls, the mirage. You have to listen to it. She ran a finger along the cool metal. If you don't, it'll punish you. Marcus smiled. It was the kind of talk he expected from a seasoned sniper, not a female damage controlman. Sounds like you speak from experience, Petty Officer. He decided to engage her, to see what lay beneath the surface. I carried a different tool for a long time, the M40, a much more precise instrument. This, he nodded at the Barrett, this is for a different kind of conversation. It's not about a surgical strike. It's about sending a message. For the first time, as a flicker of something akin to agreement, a shared understanding passed between them. Yes, sir, she said, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. It's a very specific message, one that carries a long way. 3 years in the stand, Marcus said, offering a piece of his own history as a gesture of good faith. Watched a lot of our boys use these from the hills above the Korengal, kept the bad guys honest. Riley's hands had stilled on the barrel she was holding. Ramadi, she said quietly. Fallujah. I spent some time there too, sir. A different kind of view. Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly. Contractor? Intel support? It was common to see civilian specialists, but a female DC with combat time in 2 of the hottest cities in Iraq. The pieces weren't fitting. No, sir, she said, meeting his gaze directly. Enlisted. 11B Infantry. I was attached to a scout sniper platoon. The air in the armory seemed to grow still. Marcus stared at her, and his mind recalibrating. An infantrywoman in a scout sniper platoon? It was almost unheard of. The infantry was the last bastion of the all-male club in the military, and scout snipers were the elite of the elite. He had 1,000 questions, but his training told him to wait, to let the information come to her. That's a long way from damage control on a destroyer, Petty Officer Byrne. It is, sir, she agreed, her voice soft. But a hull has to be strong to weather a storm. And I've already been through mine. Now I just want to help keep this ship afloat. She looked back at the rifle, her fingers resuming their gentle work. This is my therapy. It reminds me of where I've been and how quiet it is now. Marcus watched her for a long moment. He saw no bravado, no need to prove herself. He saw only a deep, abiding peace in the presence of the weapon. He nodded, a new level of respect settling in his gut. Carry on, Petty Officer. It's good to know the Murphy has such a dedicated caretaker for its heavy hitters. He turned and left the armory, the soft humming starting up again behind him. The encounter had been brief, but it had planted a seed of intense curiosity. He had seen a ghost in his ship, a woman with the eyes of a killer and the hands of a healer. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the need to know more about one of his sailors. And the next few days were a blur of repair inspections and endless meetings. But the image of Riley Byrne kneeling before the Barrett, her face peaceful in the harsh fluorescent light, stayed with him. It was a puzzle, and Marcus Thorne had never been able to leave a puzzle unsolved. On the third day, he found himself in the ship's administrative office, ostensibly to check on personnel records for an upcoming advancement exam. Lieutenant Commander Evans, the ship's admin officer, was a meticulous man with a passion for paperwork that bordered on the obsessive. Marcus stood by his desk, sipping a cup of bitter coffee. "Evans," he said, his voice casual, almost bored. "Pull up the service record for a Petty Officer Byrne, Riley Byrne, damage control." Evans's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Aye, sir. One moment." The screen flickered, and a file appeared. Evans scanned it quickly. "Clean record, sir. Good evaluations. Transferred to us 6 months ago from Norfolk. Now, prior service." He paused, his brow furrowing. "That's odd." "What is?" Marcus asked, leaning forward slightly. "Well, sir, her record is sealed, heavily redacted. It shows her current rate and her re-enlistment date, but everything before her transition to the DC rating about 4 years ago is classified, blocked out. I've never seen a file quite like it on an active-duty E6. He looked up at the captain, a mixture of confusion and intrigue on his face. It just says, assigned to special duty. All further inquiries to be directed to Nav Spec Warcom." Marcus felt a jolt of cold electricity run down his spine. Nav Spec Warcom, Naval Special Warfare Command, the very organization he had spent the first half of his career in. A damage controlman's file being locked behind that door was nonsensical. It was like finding a classified manual on advanced astrophysics in a kindergarten classroom. He kept his expression neutral. "All right, Evans. Thanks. Probably a clerical error from her first command." He set his coffee down and walked out, his mind racing. The seal confirmed it. Riley Byrne was no ordinary sailor. She was a ghost, deliberately hidden in plain sight. The file wasn't just redacted, it was a fortress, and the key to that fortress was held by his old brothers. He didn't go through official channels. He couldn't. His curiosity had become a burning need to understand. He waited until the end of the duty day and retreated to his stateroom, a small but private space. He pulled out his personal cell phone, a device rarely used for official business, and scrolled through his contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in over 3 years. Master Chief Thomas Tomcat McAllister, retired. Tomcat was a living legend in the sniper community. He had been Marcus's spotter for 2 deployments, a man with eyes like a hawk and a memory like a steel trap. And he now ran a high-end tactical training facility in Virginia Beach, but he still had ears everywhere. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Thorne, you finally get bored of driving a boat?" Marcus smiled. "Tomcat, good to hear your voice. Still charming the ladies with that disposition?" "Still charming the medics with my copays. What's up? You need a reference for a new security detail?" "I got a couple of kids fresh out of the teams who can shoot the wings off a gnat at 1,000. "No, Tomcat, it's not that. I need some intel, a ghost story." Marcus leaned back in his chair, the ship humming softly around him. "I've got a sailor on my ship, a woman, Petty Officer First Class, currently a damage controlman. Her name is Riley Byrne." The line went silent for a long, stretching moment, so long that Marcus checked to see if the call had dropped. "Tomcat? You there?" "I'm here. I'm Marcus." The retired Master Chief's voice had lost its jovial edge. It was now low, serious. "Why are you asking about Riley Byrne?" "You know her." "I know of her. Everyone in the community knows of her, even if they don't know her name. What the hell is she doing on a tin can in San Diego?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. Her record is locked up tighter than a drum. Nav Spec Warcom has it sealed. What aren't they telling me, Tomcat? Another long pause. Miss Marcus could almost hear the old man weighing his words, calculating the risk. Marcus, you and I bled together. We have a bond. So I'm going to tell you this, and you're going to forget where you heard it. If anyone asks, you figured it out on your own. You got it? The gravity in Tomcat's voice was palpable. I got it, Marcus confirmed, his own voice now a low whisper. Riley Byrne, Tomcat began, is a goddamn unicorn, a myth, and there are less than 100 confirmed sniper kills by women in the entire history of U.S. warfare. Most of them are from a single source, her. She wasn't just attached to a scout sniper platoon in Ramadi and Fallujah. She was the platoon's deadliest asset. They used her in ways they couldn't use the men. She was smaller, could get into hide sites that were thought impossible. She was patient in a way that defied human nature. She could sit in a puddle of sewage for 3 days without moving, just waiting for the right shot. Marcus listened, his coffee growing cold in his hand. He was painting a picture of the quiet, humming woman in the armory. She wasn't just good, Marcus. She was surgical. During the Second Battle of Fallujah, her team was pinned down for hours by a ruthless insurgent sniper known as the Barber. He'd taken out 4 Marines. The entire city was a kill box. They called in an airstrike, but it was too risky with the collateral damage. So they sent in Riley, and she exfiltrated alone, found a position in a half-collapsed minaret, and waited. She waited for 17 hours. When the Barber finally exposed himself to take a shot at a supply convoy, she put a round through his scope at a range of over 1,200 yards. The shot went through the scope and into his eye. It became a story they whispered in the chow halls. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's air conditioning. My God! That's just one story, Tomcat continued, and his voice heavy with the weight of memory. Her official count, the one the brass has in a safe somewhere, is staggering. But the stories, they're the stuff of legend. She was credited with saving countless lives. Commanders would specifically request her platoon for urban ops. She was a force multiplier, a weapon system all on her own. Then why is she here, Tomcat? Marcus asked, his mind struggling to reconcile the myth with the sailor cleaning his rifle. Why a damage controlman on a destroyer? Why not a recruiting poster? Why not a commission? The line went quiet again, and when Tomcat spoke, his voice was filled with a profound sadness. Because, Marcus, war takes its pound of flesh, even from the ones who are best at it. After her 3rd deployment, something happened. She didn't snap, not in the way you'd think. She just stopped. She became a ghost in the system. She refused all awards, all recognition. She requested a rate change, and something as far from the sound of a gunshot as she could get on a Navy base. Damage control, fixing things, not breaking them. The higher-ups, they owed her a debt they could never repay, so they let her disappear. They sealed her records to protect her from the spotlight, from the vultures who'd want to write a book or make a movie. They gave her the one thing she wanted, to be invisible. Marcus leaned forward, resting his head in his hand. He thought of the humming, and the gentle touch on the metal, the quiet peace in her eyes as she cleaned the weapon. It wasn't the peace of forgetting, it was the peace of acceptance. She wasn't running from her past, she was simply carrying it in a different way. The Barrett wasn't a tool of her trade anymore. It was a tombstone, a monument to the 312 ghosts she was forever bound to. 312, Marcus whispered, the number Tomcat had implied now feeling heavy, biblical. Yeah, Tomcat said softly. That's the number the scuttlebutt always settled on. 312 confirmed. There are SEALs with half that number who have books and movie deals. She has a mop and a bilge pump. She chose to serve even when serving meant silencing everything she was. She's the real deal, Marcus. The quietest kind of professional, the kind that doesn't need a pat on the back. You treat her right." The call ended, leaving Marcus alone in the dim light of his stateroom. He stared at the bulkhead, his mind churning. He had spent his life around killers. He had trained them, led them, and buried them. But he had never met anyone like Riley Byrne. She was the ultimate paradox, a warrior who had chosen to become a healer, a legend who demanded to be a ghost. The number echoed in his skull. 312. It wasn't just a statistic. It was 312 families who never got their sons, husbands, or fathers back. It was 312 moments of perfect, terrible clarity, each one etched into her soul. The next morning, Marcus found himself walking towards the armory again, but this time he felt different. He wasn't a commander approaching a subordinate. He was a former operator approaching a peer. He felt a profound sense of humility, a feeling he wasn't accustomed to. He found her there, as if she had never left. The Barrett was reassembled, a magnificent beast of steel and composite resting in its cradle. Riley was simply sitting on a stool next to it, her hands folded in her lap, just looking at it. She wasn't humming today. The silence in the room was heavy, contemplative. She heard his approach and looked up. This time, there was no flash of assessment in her eyes. There was only a quiet knowing, as if she had been expecting him. "Good morning, Commander." "Petty Officer Byrne," he said, his voice softer than usual. He didn't pretend to be inspecting anything. He just stood a few feet away from her, his gaze moving from her to the rifle and back. "I had a conversation with an old friend last night, a Master Chief McAllister." A flicker of something, surprise, pain, crossed her features before settling back into that calm mask. "Tomcat," she said, the name a whisper. "He was a good spotter, a better man. How is he?" "Retired, running a training facility. He misses the field." Marcus paused, choosing his next words carefully. "He told me some things about Fallujah, about Ramadi, about the barber." Riley's gaze drifted back to the Barrett. She didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was distant, as if recounting a dream. "The barber, he was good, patient. He had a Russian-made rifle, a Dragunov. He'd set up in a new spot every day, always with a clear view of the main supply route. He killed Doc Phillips first. Doc was only 19. He was trying to pull a wounded Marine behind a wall. The barber waited until he was exposed, then took the shot. It was precise." She swallowed. "We hunted him for 6 days. Every time we thought we had him, he'd slip away. He was a ghost." Marcus listened, utterly still. "The minaret was a risk," she continued, her voice dropping even lower. "It was the most obvious vantage point. Any half-decent sniper would have bracketed it. But I knew he'd think I was too smart to use it, so I did. I climbed up in the dark, through the rubble. The stench of death was thick. I found a spot behind a collapsed section of the wall. I could see his favorite alleyways, the shadows he liked to use. And I waited." She looked at her hands, the same hands he had seen so gently cleaning the weapon. 17 hours. I didn't eat, I didn't drink, I just watched. The sun rose, got hot, and started to set. I was starting to think I'd made the wrong call. Then, just as the light was starting to fail, I saw it. A flicker of movement in a doorway I'd checked 100 times. But he was covered in a blanket, looked just like a pile of rubbish, but he moved. He shifted the blanket just enough to slide the barrel of his rifle out. He was aiming at a fuel truck that was coming down the road. I had my crosshairs on him. I saw the glint of his scope as he lined up his shot. I took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed. She fell silent. The hum of the ship's ventilation system filled the space. "The shot went through his scope," Marcus said quietly. "I'm echoing Tomcat's story." Riley nodded, a single slow motion. The scope acted like a funnel. The round went in and, well, it wasn't pretty. But the shooting stopped. My team got home. Doc Phillips didn't, but 4 other Marines did. She finally looked back at Marcus. That's the math you do. You trade 1 life for 4, then you do it again, and after a while, you stop counting the lives you've saved and you only remember the faces of the ones you couldn't. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He had seen combat, had taken lives himself, but the scale of her experience, the sheer weight of it, was on a different plane. Tomcat said there were 312 confirmed, he said, the number feeling clumsy and inadequate on his tongue. That's what the book says, she confirmed without pride or shame. The book doesn't say anything about the ones you see in your dreams, the young ones who were just in the wrong place, the ones who were forced to fight. The book just keeps score. It doesn't tell you how to live with the score. Why the Barrett? Marcus asked, gesturing to the weapon. Of all the guns on this ship, why this one? She looked at the massive rifle with a tenderness that was almost maternal. Because it's the one that made the most noise. When it fires, everyone knows, and there's no hiding. It's the opposite of what I was. I was quiet, invisible. This thing is a thunderclap, cleaning it, maintaining it. It's my way of making peace with the thunder. It's the only part of that world I can still touch without feeling like I'm back there. Marcus understood then. It wasn't about clinging to the past, it was about taming it. By caring for the instrument of her former life, she was asserting her control over it, proving to herself every day that it was just a tool, that she was its master, not the other way around. He stood there for a long time, just sharing the silence with her. He didn't offer platitudes or thanks. He didn't tell her she was a hero. He knew that was the last thing she wanted to hear. He simply acknowledged her truth. The following week, the ship was ready for sea trials. The repairs were complete, and the Murphy was scheduled for a routine 5-day training exercise off the coast of Southern California. It was meant to be a shakedown cruise, a chance to test the new welds and ensure all systems were operational. For the crew, it was a welcome break from the monotony of port. Marcus was on the bridge, enjoying the familiar feel of the deck vibrating under his feet as the ship cut through the calm Pacific swells. The sun was warm, the sky a brilliant blue. It was a perfect day at sea. Then the calm was shattered. The 1MC squawked to life. General quarters, all hands. I man your battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Small craft inbound, high speed, designated hostile. The ship erupted into a controlled frenzy. Klaxons blared. Boots pounded on the deck plates. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the cold focus that combat demanded. He grabbed a headset. Con, radar. What do we have? Sir, 3 bogies, small, fast. They popped up from behind San Clemente Island, designated as go-fast boats. Possible suicide craft. They're on an intercept course, speed 50 knots and accelerating. Estimated time to impact, 8 minutes. Marcus's mind raced. Go-fast boats loaded with explosives were the nightmare of every naval commander. They were low, fast, and hard to hit. The Murphy's main guns were designed for larger targets. The CIWS, the Phalanx Close-In Weapon System, was the last line of defense, a radar-guided Gatling gun that could shred incoming missiles and aircraft. But against small maneuvering boats, it could be overwhelmed. All batteries, stand by, he ordered, his voice calm despite the storm of activity around him. Weapons control, do you have a solution? Negative, sir. They're too small, too fast, and hugging the wave tops. We can't get a solid radar lock for the main gun. CIWS is tracking, but at this range, it's a coin flip. Marcus looked at the tactical display. 3 red blips like angry hornets were closing the distance. But he had 8 minutes to make a decision that could cost the lives of his 300 sailors. He thought of the Barrett. He thought of Riley. Down in the armory, the Claxons had sent a different kind of electricity through Riley Byrne. While others scrambled to their damage control lockers, she stood frozen for a moment, her hand resting on the Barrett's cold barrel. The sound of the alarm was the same. The urgent voices on the 1MC were the same. For a heart-stopping second, she was back in Fallujah, the air thick with dust and cordite, waiting for the next mortar to fall. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the memory back. You're on a ship. You're a DC. This is your job now. But her hands wouldn't move towards the firefighting gear. They stayed on the rifle. She looked at it, and for the first time in 4 years, she didn't see a tombstone. She saw a tool that could stop a threat from a mile away, a tool she knew better than any other person on that ship. A young seaman ran past the armory hatch, his face pale with fear. "They're gonna hit us! They're gonna blow us up!" he yelled, his voice cracking. Riley looked at the boy, then back at the Barrett. The math was simple again. The ship had 300 souls. The go-fast boats were closing fast. The ship's defenses were designed for a different kind of war. But she wasn't. Up on the bridge, the tension was a physical force. 2 minutes to impact, the radar operator yelled. Marcus's jaw was clenched so tight it ached. He was about to give the order to maneuver radically to present a smaller target and hope for the best when a new voice cut through the chatter on the internal circuit. It was quiet, steady, and utterly unmistakable. "Bridge, this is Petty Officer Byrne in the armory, requesting permission to open the forward missile deck hatch." For a split second, everyone on the bridge froze. The request was insane. The forward missile deck was a sealed environment, housing the ship's most sensitive vertical launch system cells. Opening it during an attack was unthinkable. "Byrne, this is the captain. Get to your DC station. Now, that's an order." "Sir, with respect, I can stop them." Her voice was calm, almost serene. "The Barrett. I can shoot from the missile deck. It's the highest point on the bow, the clearest field of fire. I can make the shot. You know I can." Marcus looked at the tactical display. 60 seconds to impact. The CIWS was spinning up, its radar seeking a target. But the boats were too erratic. He had a choice. Trust in the ship's automated systems or trust in a ghost with 312 confirmed kills. It wasn't a choice at all. "Do it," he ordered. "Evans, give her access to the forward deck. Now." Down in the armory, Riley didn't hesitate. She grabbed the massive rifle, its familiar weight a comfort, and slung it over her shoulder. She grabbed a canvas bag of ammunition, the heavy .50 caliber rounds clinking together. She ran. She sprinted through the passageways, a petite woman carrying a 40-pound rifle like it was a toy. She reached the access hatch to the forward missile deck, punched in the override code Evans had given her, and climbed the ladder into the open air. The wind hit her like a physical force, whipping her hair loose from its bun. The sun was blinding. Below her, the bow of the ship rose and fell with the swell. And ahead, or less than 2 miles away, she saw them. 3 small boats, their hulls hammering against the waves, leaving white rooster tails in their wake. They were heading straight for the Murphy. She didn't think. She didn't feel. Her body moved on its own, an ancient, well-honed muscle memory taking over. She dropped to one knee on the steel deck, the vibration of the ship's engines humming through her bones. She planted the Barrett's bipod on a non-skid surface, near her experienced eye, instantly finding a level spot. She pulled back the heavy bolt, chambering around with a solid, metallic clack that was swallowed by the wind. She leaned into the scope. The world narrowed to a circle of glass. The first boat, the leader, filled her vision. She could see the figures inside, the gleam of an outboard motor, the low profile designed for speed. The rangefinder in her scope did the math. 1,800 yards. A long shot for any shooter, but for her, with this rifle, it was a conversation. She took a breath, let half of it out. She felt the ship's movement, the subtle roll of the deck, and adjusted for it, her body becoming one with the vessel. She led the target, calculating its speed, the windage, the Coriolis effect. Her finger rested on the trigger, feeling the slight take-up. On the bridge, everyone watched the feed from the deck cameras. They saw a lone figure kneeling on the bow, at the massive rifle looking almost absurdly large in her hands. They saw her steady, utterly still against the chaos of the wind and sea. The first boat was 1,000 yards out. 800. 600. At 500 yards, it would be too late. The CIWS would open fire, but the boats were too close, the risk of collateral damage from the ship's own weapon too high. Marcus held his breath. Then, the shot. It wasn't a loud crack like a normal rifle. The Barrett's report was a deep, the thunderous boom that echoed across the water and rattled the windows on the bridge. They saw Riley's body absorb the massive recoil, her shoulder rolling with the punch. A second later, the lead boat simply disintegrated. The heavy .50 caliber round, designed to pierce engine blocks, had struck the fuel tank. It erupted in a fireball of orange flame and black smoke, debris raining down on the water. The bridge erupted in cheers, but Marcus held up a hand for silence. He watched the screen. And the other two boats were veering, thrown into confusion by the sudden, violent destruction of their leader. But they were still coming. On the bow, Riley didn't celebrate. She worked the bolt, the spent casing ejecting and clattering on the deck. The sound was mechanical, final. She acquired the second boat. It was zigzagging now, making herself a harder target. But she had trained for this. She had shot at moving targets in sandstorms. A zigzagging boat in calm water was child's play. Boom. Or another thunderclap. This round didn't hit the fuel tank. It hit the engine block, shearing the lower unit clean off the transom. The boat, robbed of its power, spun violently and capsized, throwing its occupants into the churning water. One left. The third boat's driver, seeing the fate of his companions, panicked. He turned hard, trying to flee back towards the island. But he made a fatal mistake. He turned broadside to the ship. Riley saw the entire profile of the boat present itself to her. It was a target she couldn't miss. She breathed, aimed, and fired for the third and final time. Boom. The round punched through the thin hull, and a heartbeat later, the boat's own explosives cooked off. The third fireball rose into the perfect blue sky. Silence descended on the bridge. The only sounds were the ship's engines and the gentle lapping of waves. The red blips were gone from the radar screen. In their place were 3 expanding patches of burning fuel and floating debris. On the bow, Riley lowered the Barrett. The adrenaline that had flooded her system began to recede, leaving a profound, hollow exhaustion in its wake. She looked at the rifle in her hands, the barrel still hot, a wisp of smoke curling from its muzzle. The ghosts of Fallujah and Ramadi had just been joined by 3 new ones. But these weren't civilians or confused conscripts. And these were men who had intended to kill her shipmates. The math was simple again. She had traded 3 lives for 300. She slowly got to her feet, her legs shaky. She looked back at the bridge knowing they were all watching her. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a weapon that had just been fired. And like any weapon, after the shot, there was only the quiet and the wait for what came next. The ship returned to port 2 days later, and the incident was already being dissected by intelligence analysts and debriefing teams. The go-fast boats had been traced back to a known drug cartel that was expanding its operations, testing the Navy's defenses. They hadn't counted on meeting a defense they couldn't anticipate. For Riley, the days after the shooting were a blur of questions. She was debriefed by NCIS, by a team from Naval Intelligence, and finally by 2 quiet men in civilian clothes who asked very specific questions about her shooting positions and her state of mind. She answered them all with the same calm, detached professionalism. She was a sailor who had acted to defend her ship. That was the official story. And for the most part, it was true. But the whispers had started. The crew had seen the video feeds. They had seen the impossible shots. The legend of Riley Byrne, of the damage controlman who could shoot the wings off a fly at a mile, began to spread through the ship like wildfire. Sailors who had never given her a second look now regarded her with a mixture of awe and a strange, respectful fear. They didn't know about the 312, but they knew she had just saved their lives. Marcus watched the effect it had on her. She retreated further into herself. The armory, once her sanctuary, was now a place people gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of her and to ask her questions. She stopped going. She threw herself into her damage control duties, spending hours in the bilges, checking pumps and valves, anywhere she could be alone with the sound of machinery and the smell of oil. One evening, Marcus found her in the farthest, darkest corner of the engineering space, sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at a pressure gauge. He approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She shrugged, not looking at him. He found another bucket and sat down heavily. For a long time they just sat there in the humming, vibrating darkness. "You did an incredible thing out there," Marcus said finally. "You saved this ship." "I did my job," she replied, her voice flat. "I used a tool I know how to use." "That's not what I'm talking about," Marcus said. "I'm talking about the cost. I saw your face after the third shot. I've seen that look before, in the mirror." She finally looked at him, on her green eyes seeming to glow in the dim light. "Then you know," she whispered. "You know it doesn't feel like saving. It just feels